Agrarian reform is essentially the rectification of the whole system of agriculture, an important aspect of the Philippine economy because nearly half of the population is employed in the agricultural sector, and most citizens live in the rural areas. It also focused on the political and economic class character of the relations of production and distribution in farming and related enterprises, and how this connect to the wider class structures. In our attempt to understand the development of agrarian reform in the Philippines, we turned our attention to our country's history, especially our colonial past, where we could find the root of the agrarian whose the country experienced up to this day. Let's talk about the evolution of policies on the agrarian reform. First is the land ownership in the Philippines under the Spain. The Spaniards colonized our country, and they brought with them the system of pueblo agriculture, when rural communities, often dispersed and scattered in nature, were organized into pueblo and given lands to cultivate. During this time, the Filipinos were not able to own a land because the owner of all the lands in the Philippines is the king of the Spain, and Filipinos were only assigned to this land to cultivate them, and they paid their colonial tributes to the Spanish authorities in the form of agricultural products. This system is also called the encomienda system, where it is an unfair system for Filipinos because they couldn't have their own land and they just only plant there to have their shares so that they could have crops and products for their daily survival. This encomienda system, the hacienda system, developed as the Spanish government implemented policies that would fast-track the entry of the colony into the capitalist world. In the process, Filipinos fought the Philippine Revolution in a confluence of motivation, but their greatest desire was for the freedom with the necessity of owning a land. Is the land ownership in the Philippines under the Americans. The Americans were aware that the main cause of social unrest in the Philippines is the landlessness, and so they attempt to end the deplorable condition of tenants farmers by passing several land policies to increase the small landholders and distribute ownership to the bigger number of Filipino tenants and farmers. But land ownership did not improve during this time. In fact, it made even worsened because there is no limit to the size of land holdings people could possess, and also the accessibility of possession was limited to those who can afford to buy, register, and acquire fixed property titles. So moreover, the system introduced by the American enabled more lands to be placed under tenancy and lead to widespread peasant uprisings. So the evolution of policies in the agrarian reform under the Americans were also not unfair to the Filipinos because even if they give Filipinos the right to buy, not all Filipinos are rich enough to afford to buy lands for their own. Is the post-war intervention toward agrarian reform. Rehabilitation and rebuilding after the war was focused on providing solution to the problem of the past. The administration of President Rojas passed Republic Act No. 34 to establish a 70-30 sharing arrangement between tenants and landlord respectively, and reduced the interest of landowner loans to tenants at 6% or less. Under the term Elpidio Carino, the Land Settlement Development Corporation, or the LADISICO, was established to accelerate and expand the resettlement program for peasants. Thus, agency later on became the National Resettlement and Rehabilitation Administration, or NARA. So the LADISICO was later on become the NARA administration. Under the NARA administration is Ramon Magsaysay of the Republic Act No. 1199. The Land Agricultural Tenancy Act was passed to govern the relationship between landholders and tenant farmers, protecting the tenurial rights of tenants and enforce tenancy practices. The Court Agricultural Relation was created in 1955 to improve tenancy security, fix land rentals of tenants' farms, and resolve land disputes filed by the landowners and peasant organization. Next is the agrarian reform efforts under Marcos. President Marcos declared martial law in 1972, enabling him essentially wipe out the landlord-dominated Congress. Presidential Decree No. 27, or the Agrarian Reform of the Philippines, became the core of the agrarian reform during Marcos' regime. Under the Rice Sufficiency Program, or the Masagana 99, farmers were able to borrow from banks and purchase 3-hectare plots of land and agricultural inputs. During Marcos' regime, landlessness increased, which made it all the more difficult for the program to succeed because landlessness, peasants were excluded from the program. This was even worsened because of the Marcos corruption and his cronies, who were also involved in the agricultural sector. Is the post-1986 agrarian reform. On July 22, 1987, Aquino issued Presidential Proclamation 131 and Executive 229, which outlined land reform programs. In 1988, the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law, or the CARL, was introduced by the same name, Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, or the CARP. These agrarian reforms enabled the distribution of agricultural lands to tenants, farmers from landowners. CARP was limited because it was accomplished very little during the administration of Aquino. It only accomplished 22.5% of land distribution in 6 years owing to the fact that Congress dominated by the land elite. And under the administration of the President Ramos, CARP implementation was speeded in order to meet the 10-year time frame. By 1996, the Department of Agrarian Reform distributed only 58.25% of the total area targeted by covered by the program. Last devolution is a CARP and a future agrarian reform in the Philippines. The new deadline of CARP expired in 2008, leaving 1.2 million farmers beneficiaries and 1.6 million hectares of agricultural land to be distributed for farmers. In 2009, President Arroyo signed Republic Act No. 9700 or the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program Extension with reforms CARPER. From 2009 to 2014, CARPER has distributed a total of 1 million hectares of lands to 900,000 farmer beneficiaries. After 27 years of land reforms and 2 Aquino administration, 500,000 hectares of lands remain undistributed. Until these challenges are surmounted, genuine agrarian reform in the Philippines remain but a dream to Filipino farmers who have been fighting for the rights to land ownership for centuries.